And I go to great lengths to get well dressed because I'm only 100 pound. So I got to make up for that loss of weight by putting wool on. Right now I have thick woolen leggings on, I've got thick woolen socks on, I've got a cashmere skirt on, I've got a woolen shirt there, and I've got a silk scarf, and I have a combination possum and merino throw. So I am toasty warm, to the point that I had to open the window a little bit. Because remember, in Australia, we live according to the elements. Now, if it is a cold morning, we'd light the fire, but we don't have this constant heating like you do in the US. And I do recognise that when you got snow, you need something like that. But I have been into the Amish houses in Wisconsin, and they have 6 foot snow there. Their houses are toasty warm because they've got a wood fire in there. And when you think about it, how did they keep warm in Canada 100 years ago? They just had their wood fires. And you know how the Amish dry their clothes? They hang all their clothes out on the clothesline in the middle of winter, and it freezes. And then they get it at the end of the day and flick it, and it flicks all the ice off, and the clothes are 3/4 dry. And then they just hang it around the wood fire. Interesting. And we don't know what the future holds. 2020 told us how quickly things can just be shut down. I think a lot of people were challenged. We're to become a little bit more independent. Not a little bit more, a lot more independent. This morning we're going to talk about food. And food is vital. The life of the flesh is in the bloods. Leviticus 17:11. The reason why the life of the flesh is in the blood is the blood carries the oxygen, and we've been looking at how you can increase your blood's ability to take in oxygen. Are you practicing only nose breathing on your exercise? You get better at it. I can promise you get better at it. I always have a tissue in my pocket, because often when you start to walk in the morning, your lymphatic system starts moving, which sweeps away waste from the tissues and the tonsils. It's not unusual for them to start throwing off waste, and sometimes it can come up into your nose, and it's hard to breathe through your nose if it's a little stuffy. So I always have a tissue, and I love it when I cough up a couple of lumps on my morning walk. It's coming from my tonsils. My body's cleaning very well. Some say, why would you have that, Barbara? Look at the way you live. Well, I fly in aeroplanes, don't I? And sometimes I'm in traffic, and I can't always eat 100% organic food. So we've always got a little bit of a waste in our body. But I thank God for my tonsils, my lymphatic system. And so when I cough up that lump, I'm very happy. Where was it before I coughed it up? That's what you got to think. And whenever you see things like that, you know what you say? Thanks, body. Thanks, body, you're doing a good job. So the blood carries the oxygen, the blood carries the water. Are you getting better at drinking more water? Are you aiming for at least 2 before breakfast? I find, because breakfast is quite late for me, I wake at 5 or 6, I'm drinking 4 before breakfast. So that's half my daily intake. Best time is early in the morning. Because when you wake up in the morning, your body has just awoken from a fast. And it's the most dehydrated time of the day for our body is when we wake up in the morning. But the blood also carries the nutrients. And we are the ones that choose the type of nutrients. When we went on our journey through the gastrointestinal tract, we had a look at how, yes, it's important to eat good quality food, but it's also important to ensure that it's getting digested effectively. So let's look at food this morning. So this morning we're going to look at food, and I'm going to do this from the acid-alkaline balance. If you've ever had a swimming pool, you have to test the acid-alkaline every morning because, this is interesting. Learn something new every day. My pens can all click together. If ever you've had a swimming pool, you have to test the acid-alkaline balance, because if the water goes too acid, the pipes corrode. If the water goes too alkaline, algae grows on the pipe. So there's a balance there. And how much more in the human body is this acid-alkaline balance important? And the acid-alkaline balance is measured on a scale that's called the pH scale. Why is it called pH? Because when you dissolve acid in a solution, it gives off hydrogen ions. And when you dissolve alkaline in solution, it gives off hydroxy ions. So pH means potential hydroxy or potential hydrogen. That's what the pH means. Up the acid end, the reading is 0. Up the alkaline end, the reading is 14. And right in the middle, we've got neutral. Neutral means neither acid nor alkaline. And all water should be neutral. Unfortunately today, because of the addition of chlorine and fluoride, most water is a little to the acid side. Blood has a reading on the pH scale, and blood's reading will always sit between 7.34 and 7.35 and 7.4. If you test, there's no need to test your blood, it'll always sit within that range, because if blood pH goes up to 8, that person will die. They'll go into a coma and die of alkalosis. And if blood pH drops down to 7.22, that person will go into a coma and die of acidosis. So there can't be much variation there, and we don't have to worry about the pH of our blood. There are two organs that are constantly keeping it within that range. One is your lungs, and that explains why Jacqueline and I chat away on our morning walk until we get to the hill. And I'm sure we've all walked up that hill, is that right? We walked up it 4 times this morning. So we had 4 very high intensities. And when we get to the hill, we stop talking because we start breathing. We start breathing very deeply, and we don't choose to breathe that way. What's happening is the cells are burning more oxygen, more glucose, giving off more carbon dioxide, maybe a little bit of lactic acid. And so we're starting to get a bit of acid effect in the blood. Maybe the blood's dropping to 7.35, 7.4. The brain goes, breathe deeply, because when we breathe deeply, we take in more oxygen, and breathing deeply means we're breathing out more carbon dioxide. So in that way, the lungs are helping to balance the pH of the blood. Also the kidneys. The kidneys work constantly at maintaining the pH balance. So here is the kidney, and the little filtering units that are responsible for this balancing all sit on the edge of the kidney. The fact is we've got approximately 1 million filtering units in one kidney, and our kidney's about as big as our fist. I stayed with a man in Germany a month ago who was 7 foot. His fist was bigger than my fist, which means his kidney is bigger than my kidney. And you can teach the little children their kidney is as big as their fist, and it sits just under the ribs. So let's magnify one of the filtering units. This is called the Bowman's capsule. And the blood comes into the Bowman's capsule, it's filtered through all the little filtering units, and then the filtrate that's filtered out of the blood weaves around these tubules, and then it's urinated out. That's the bladder, where we urinate out. So the blood comes in, and the blood vessel coming in is wider than the blood vessel coming out. And the reason for that is pressure. Pressure builds up inside the filtering unit so that those little filtering units are filtering the blood. And then the blood vessel comes out and weaves around the tubules. In a 24-hour period, these little units filter 1,800 litres of blood. Now, we don't have that much blood. Every 2 minutes, 1.2 litres is being filtered. The fact is, it takes 1 minute for 1 drop of blood to go around your whole body. Quite incredible. Out of that 1,800 litres of blood that's filtered, 180 litres of filtrate comes out. But we don't urinate out 180 litres a day, praise God. We don't. Otherwise, we'd all be leaving this room every 5 minutes. We only urinate out 1.5 litres. So there's a shortfall there of approximately 160 litres. That's because in this tubule area, there's a reabsorption. It's right there in that tubule area that the pH of the blood is being monitored. So let's say the pH of the blood is getting too acid. It's in this tubule area that extra acid is dumped into the tubules to be urinated out. But let's say the pH of the blood is going too alkaline. Then it is here that extra acid is pulled out of the tubules back into the blood. So it is in that way, and I think you'll agree with me, quite a fascinating way, that our blood is constantly being monitored and balanced if necessary. What an incredible creation we live in. But not only is pH balanced there, but also sodium and water levels are balanced. So a clear sign that someone's kidneys aren't working well is when their ankles get swollen. Also in that area, blood pressure is being balanced. When someone has compromised kidneys, they've often got high blood pressure and swelling in the ankles. So it is in that way that the kidneys and the lungs are constantly keeping the pH of the blood within the range between 7.35 and 7.4. So we don't have to worry about the pH of the blood, but the pH of the cell can change. So the pH of the cell should sit at approximately 6.5. Now that's very slightly acid, and there's a reason for that. The most acidic substance is sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid travels at the speed of light. The most alkaline mineral is calcium. And on the scale of speed, calcium doesn't even move. And that explains why the hydroponic gardener is constantly testing the pH of the water that the roots sit in. And if the water goes to acid, the roots burn. If the water goes to alkaline, then the gardener doesn't get the uptake of minerals out of the water and into the plant. Can you see it's a speed thing? This will make more sense as we go through. The gardener aims for a soil pH of 6.4. The Bible says in Genesis 3:19, we come from dust, we go back to dust, we are dust. So the dust of the ground, the soil, and the cell pH, very similar. In a cellular pH of 5.5, this is where cancer thrives. This is where disease thrives. This is where fungus thrives. And even though there's only the drop of 1 point, because it's logarithmic, the drop of 1 point means 60% less oxygen available at the cellular level. Cancer cannot live in the presence of oxygen. So when we look at this body, when we look at how, if you give it the right conditions, it will heal, it's important to know about the pH, because if we keep our cellular pH at approximately 6.5, makes it very difficult for cancer to get a hold on the body. Coca-Cola, where does it sit? It's a killer, 2.6. And you will be shocked to know this, but some people drink it. It's true. Many are sick through ignorance, isn't that right? When I was in the little island of Taveuni in Fiji, I was asked to speak at an Indian school. And I spoke on the simple laws of health and for about half an hour to all the children. And then the principal of the school, he was a very well-dressed, efficient Indian man. He said, there's a Coca-Cola factory not far down the road. And he said, and I know that they use Coca-Cola to clean their machinery. So what affects the pH? That's what we need to know. What affects it? And this might surprise you and it might not surprise you. Sunshine. Did you get a nice bit yesterday? Just the right amount of sunshine alkalizes. Too much sunshine, we burn. That creates an acid condition. But on the other hand, no sunshine. No sunshine also creates an acid condition. It's like the plants. If a plant never gets sunshine, it looks light and sickly. And I know there are some plants that like indoors, but they're still getting a little sunshine. And I know that we had some staff, it rained, so they put the plants out in the rain. That's a great idea, but guess what happened the next day? The sun came out in full force, and a lot of the poor little plants were burnt. So it's like people ask about microwave. I said, here's a little experiment. You can do it on the plants. You have two plants, they're exactly the same. And one you water with water out of the tap, out of the creek. And then the other one you only water with microwaved water. And just watch how quickly that one dies. You see, we don't need double-blind studies, huh? We don't need these big scientific studies. We can just do simple ones ourselves. Yep. Better to experiment on the plant than you. Use of water. Use of water implies there's a time to drink water and there's a time not to drink water. And we've looked at that in regarding digestion. We need to be drinking between and not with the meals. Water alkalizes. Many today are dehydrated. In a dehydrated body, that creates a very acid environment. I've never met anyone that drinks too much water, yet to meet that person. Dr. Christopher, he says, here's a sign that someone's drinking too much water. They put their head on the side and the water comes out their ears. In other words, it's almost impossible to drink too much water. Most people don't because they don't want to be visiting the bathroom all day. Sleep, just the right amount of sleep alkalizes. I was so excited when I woke up at 6 o'clock this morning. I had 8.25 hours. If you only got 6 hours, rejoice in your 6. Rejoice in your 6 because you know what to do to train your body to get more. Trust. Trust in God. When we trust in God, it takes care of our anxiety. You're most blessed because you're going to get a message tonight on the mind and you're going to get another message on Saturday morning on the mind. There'll be some common denominators, as you'll probably see in what you're hearing here and what you're hearing at night, but there are also some different things. When we're anxious, and it is a choice, as you will see when we look at especially the lecture tonight. The lecture tonight's called Healing the Mind. We have a choice to stress, we have a choice to worry, or we have a choice to go, thank you, Father in heaven. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, the Bible says, in everything give thanks. So there's my arm, broken, painful. How do I thank God for that? You know what I thanked him for? That it wasn't my right hand. I thanked him that it wasn't the day before I was flying to America. When you have a look at the situation, there are always things to be thankful for. You can look at a rose bush and you can look at the roses or you can look at the thorns. So it's often just the way you see it. And when we are stressed and worried all the time, that creates an acid environment. It's like the mother that rang me up. Well, she emailed me. She said, Barbara, my little boy is usually running around all day. He's 5 and he's just lying down. He doesn't want to eat. I said, yeah, he's sick. Everyone gets sick sometimes. She said, I've taken him to emergency and they said there's nothing wrong with him. I've got him booked in to see the gastroenterologist. I think it's pancreatitis. I said, what? Where'd that come from? I said, please don't take your son to the gastroenterologist. And you know what happens? They look at it and they know there's nothing wrong, but the mother is so insistent that they eventually give a drug to make them happy. Yeah. I said to her, when you go into that room to look at your son, I want you to smile. Because you know what the child thinks when they see you frowning? I must be, terribly, I'm dying. Yeah. 3 days later, she said, he's better, thank you. Where's common sense gone? Out the window. Not very common today. So trust in God and thank Him every day for what you have. And that helps to create an alkaline environment in the body. Abstain. In a minute I'm going to list the things that have the most acid effect and the things that most have the alkaline effect. Did you hear that murmur through 700 people last night when I mentioned caffeine? What does that tell you? Yes, caffeine has an acid effect, as you'll see in a minute. Inhale through the nose. Many people who are mouth breathing aren't getting the oxygen that they need, and oxygen alkalizes. When you breathe in through and out through your nose, you get more oxygen. Nutrition, we're going to have a look at food in detail in a minute, but it's probably not a surprise to you that that breakfast you had this morning was just about all alkaline. Moderation. You can have excellent food, but if you overdo it, even the most alkalizing food can become acid purely because you can't digest it and it starts to ferment. We had a guy attend our program who had an eating disorder and he would eat 5 loaves of bread at one sitting. And then he would beat himself up and not eat for a week. But he'd just eaten 5 loaves of bread one day and he's driving his car and the police pulled him over and tested him for alcohol in the blood and he had an blood alcohol reading. Because the stomach couldn't break all that food down, so it started to ferment. And that fermentation process, see, this is a warm environment here, it was giving off alcohol. So, moral of the story is don't eat 5 loaves of bread. Get behind the ear. Exercise. Too much exercise. Doing high aerobic for 5 hours a day can create a little bit too much lactic acid. But most people are guilty of not enough exercise. So as you can see, keeping a balance of these basic laws of health helps to maintain that 6.5. But what has the most effect is the food that we're eating. But let me give you an illustration first. So some of my family and friends break every law every day. In fact, when I get together with my sister and we're in the coffee shop and she's having her cappuccino and I'm sipping on my peppermint tea, we talk about the weather. Then we remain friends. And you will find that when you go home from here, your family's expecting you to beat them over the head with health. Is that right? And you know the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. But you look so good and you feel so good, and after about a week they'll go, all right, what have you done? And you can say, I'm so glad you asked. That's when you can speak. That's when you can speak. So some of my family and friends break every law every day. Lungs and kidneys are struggling, but they're just managing to keep the pH of the blood where it should be, and then, oh no, they have a cup of coffee. They have a cup of coffee, and the lungs and the kidneys were already struggling, And blood pH starts to drop, 7.35, 34, 33, alarm bells go off. The last resort buffer system is called on. The most alkaline mineral, what is it, students? Calcium, is pulled out of its biggest storage house, which is bones. Dentists are making a fortune on this, aren't they? Dentists didn't make any money out of my kids. Choose your heart. It's not a pleasant thing being in that chair, getting injections, and choose your heart. So this calcium is pulled out of the bones in a form of calcium phosphate, and it gets into the blood. It immediately begins to neutralise the dropping acidity, 7.33, 34, 35. We're safe. But we now have free calcium excess floating through the bloodstream. What's the body going to do with that? It'll dump it in the kidneys, kidney stones, in the gallbladder, gallstones. It'll dump it on the bones as bone spurs. If you say to the doctor, what's this? You'll say, it's a bone spur. And you'll say, what's a bone spur? And he'll say, it's a calcium deposit. And if you say, well, why is the calcium deposit on my bone and not in my bone? And unless he's studied nutrition, you can't blame the genes or the germs on that one. He'll say, we don't know, or we're not sure. We're sure the research will come. But you now know how to get rid of a bone spur, castor oil compresses. And the beauty of castor oil compresses is they'll never break up your bones. They work with the unnatural formations. Remember Psalm 104 verse 14, God gave herbs for the service of man. Service of man. They're there to serve you. They work with you. It's like if a woman has a fibroid and it's growing, and at the same time she's pregnant and the fetus is growing, and she puts castor oil on that castor oil is not going to break her baby up because it works with the needs of the body. It'll only work on the fibroid. So even though that castor oil can break up a fibroid, it'll never break up your bone. It comes back to trust. Isn't that true? Trusting God that he gave us this incredible piece of machinery. It's like one lady with cataracts, I said, put castor oil in the eye or on the eyelid. She said, is it safe? Well, do you know what the doctor's offering if you've got glaucoma? A needle in the eye. Does anyone ever ask the doctor if that's safe? Don't let anyone put a needle in your eye.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Some people allow it to happen every month. One lady allowed it to happen every month, and after 1 year, that eye got cancer. 6 months later, they removed the eye. You talk to me about safe, I'll talk to you about safe. Don't let anyone put a needle in your eye. So my husband, he goes to the eye doctor. The eye doctor says, oh, there's pressure build up in your eye. You need to see a specialist. Michael said, nah. The doctor said, excuse me, Mr. O'Neill, but you need to see a specialist. Michael said, no. He went to the door and the doctor followed him and said, do you want to go blind? Michael turned around and said, no. You can say no. Guess what? He didn't go blind. Put not your trust in princes. Sometimes they get it wrong. And so what affects the acid alkaline in the body the most is the food we're eating. So we're going to have a look at alkaline forming foods. Notice I said alkaline forming foods because the most alkaline food that you can eat is the lemon. And you might say, no, the lemon's acid. You are right. Students, what's the only part of our body that should be acid? Stomach. Why should it be acid? To break down the protein. That's right. And we need that protein. No good eating protein and drinking with your meal all the time and then the protein ends up in the toilet. No, we want it to end up in our cells. So one of the best digestive aids is lemon. And every dressing that Shauna Lynn makes for you at lunchtime is lemon-based. So it's a digestive aid. And in your Misty Mountain cookbook, there's a variety. There's probably about 5 or 6 beautiful dressings. And they've all got lemon in them.
Why did they call it citric acid then?
Good question. Well, it does contain citric acid because in the stomach it has an acid effect. But lemon is high in alkaline minerals. And those alkaline minerals are magnesium and calcium, sodium and potassium and iron. So when the lemon gets broken down in the gastrointestinal tract and absorbed into the tissues, it has an alkaline effect in the tissues. What an amazing God we serve, yeah? And the other food that's very high in these minerals is dark green leafy vegetables, whether they're raw or they're cooked, because when you cook dark green leafy vegetables, you do not lose your minerals. You only lose your minerals if you throw the water away that you cook them in. And that's what we give you every night is broth. All the minerals have come out of the vegetables into the water. And you drink that water. Dark green leafy vegetables. And down here, we're in the southern states. The 2 police that are guarding me every night, well, they're real strong southern accents. I took a little video of them talking yesterday because send it back home because we think it's great, this southern accent. But down here in south, you got collard greens, is that right? And lamb's quarters. We never heard of such a thing. We have, I know in Alabama, they have lamb's quarters, which is another green. So the greens that we're familiar with are spinach and silver beet. And I think lamb's quarters and collard greens are very similar to that. Have you looked at the garden? There's a whole nice array there. And we had some yesterday, that cream spinach, that was very nice. Those dark green leafy vegetables are very high in the alkaline minerals, and that's why on Monday and Tuesday, every second juice we gave you a green barley, because we wanted to alkalize your tissues. The only part of the body that should be acid is the stomach, and waste that's coming out of the body is acid. Vegetables have an alkaline effect, but there is one group of vegetables that can, in some people, have an acid effect. So let's look at what that group of vegetables is. It's the nightshade group of vegetables. I'm so glad yesterday when I went to the garden, I saw there were some tomatoes that had survived the first frost, so we picked them all because there was another big frost this morning. So we put a question mark here because for some people, this nightshade group of vegetables has an alkaline effect, and for some people they have an acid effect. It's the tomato, bell pepper. In Australia we call it a capsicum. I know in Mexico they call it pimento. Eggplant, sometimes called aubergine. And the last one is potato. And I know the Fijians call this white man's potato. Sometimes it's called the Irish potato. This is not the sweet potato because the sweet potato is not a potato, it's a yam. So for some people, these foods have an acid effect, and some people they have an alkaline effect. And we have discovered that if someone has arthritis or gout, they're best leaving off those foods. And it was only 2 years ago that I discovered why. And the reason why is because these foods are high in a plant chemical called lectins. And Dr. Stephen Gundry has written a book called The Plant Paradox, where he basically suggests because of the lectins in foods, we should be basically carnivores. But I wanted to look at it from God's perspective because as I showed you yesterday, that in the Garden of Eden, God said, behold, I've given you every plant plant bearing a seed. And what Dr. Stephen Gundry says, we shouldn't be eating legumes, hardly any grains, nuts and seeds, because they're high in lectins. So I wanted to investigate more. What are lectins? Lectins are high in unripe fruit. So when I was in Andalusia, Spain, about 2 months ago, the figs were on. And notice that the birds never eat the green figs. They wait till the figs are purple. And when the purple figs are the sweet ones, there's no more lectins. So I thought, well, now I know why God put lectins in, because it's bitter. So no one wants to eat it. If lectins get into your blood, they increase inflammation. And of course, this is Dr. Stephen Gundry's theory. But if we've got good gut flora, and we do happen to eat something with lectins still in it, it'll disarm the lectins. All your legumes have lectins, but if you soak them and rinse them very, very well, or pressure cook them or slow cook them, it disarms the lectins.
And cooking with those will too, right?
Not necessarily. In Europe, they traditionally de-seed the tomato and the bell pepper, and that takes the lectins away. So when you look at the traditional way of preparing food, it took the lectins away. There's a book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, and she looks at all the traditional ways that food was prepared. Grains were usually either slow cooked or ground and made into sourdough breads. And that sourdough process disarms the lectins. So we don't need to become carnivores. We can eat plant foods as long as we prepare them properly. And also ensure that your gut flora is great. Did you count your fibres this morning? Try and have at least 7 different types of fibre every meal. That feeds the microorganisms and keeps the gut happy. I have a question mark there, because for some people they work, for some people they don't work. I can have a little tomato now and then, especially if it's organic. I can't touch bell pepper. If I touch bell pepper, it repeats on me all afternoon and my energy's gone. What's my body just said to me? Please don't touch that. I have a little eggplant now and then. I have potato most days. My husband has about 4 times the potatoes I have. These are illustrations of listening to your body. So why can't I have the bell pepper? I think it might have something to do with the fact that my mother died at 51, a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis. I'm so glad that genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Maybe if I ate bell pepper every day and broke every law of health, it wouldn't be long before maybe I would have serious arthritis. So it's once again an illustration of what I've been talking about is listen. We have found at our retreat about 30% of people cannot handle a bell pepper, so we don't serve it in the retreat. If you love bell pepper, I think especially if you're from Mexico, they use a lot of bell peppers. If you love it, it sits well, eat it. One lady said, I can eat the red and not the green. Another lady said, well, I can eat the raw and not the cooked. And another lady said, well, I can eat the cooked and not the raw. I love these stories, because what are they stories of? People who are listening. And we've seen many people totally conquer arthritis. Isn't that good news? Even rheumatoid arthritis, what are we told that is? Autoimmune. I have to tell you, I don't believe in autoimmune diseases. I don't believe in them. Because the body was not designed to eat itself. If someone has an autoimmune disease, then we have to investigate, when did this begin? Because remember Proverbs 26 verse 2, the curse causeless shall not come. There is a reason if someone is not well. Rather than just being given a label. Remember, we've only been given one label. 1 John chapter 3 verse 1, behold what manner of love the Father has given unto us, that we shall be called the sons and the daughters of God. That's our label, not autoimmune, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. Reject them. Reject them. Don't take on those labels, because you know what? They don't know you. Isn't that true? They don't know you. Because what are we told about autoimmune diseases? There's no cure. Well, whoever said that doesn't understand this human body. We've seen people totally recover from so-called autoimmune diseases. When tomato is cooked with olive oil, I think you'll agree with me, they go very nice together. I do. With olive oil, something is released that's not available in the raw tomato. It's lycopene. And lycopene is a potent antioxidant that can reduce the inflammation of the prostate gland. So ladies, feed your men a cooked tomato and olive oil dish at least 3 times a week. Fruit. Fruit has a question mark. Why does fruit have a question mark? Vegetables are high in fibre, high in minerals, low in sugars. But fruit is high in fibre, high in sugars, low in minerals. And if someone has a yeast presence in their body and they eat a lot of fruit, the sugar in the fruit feeds the yeast, and as the yeast feeds on the sugar and the fruit, it gives off acetic acid. It gives off uric acid. It gives off lactic acid. And it also gives off alcohol. Can you see what happens when you feed yeast enough sweet? It feathers its nest. It creates this 5.5 environment that it thrives in. And that's why if someone wants help conquering cancer, we suggest no fruit for 6 weeks. And then going on a very low fruit diet. If someone has a yeast presence in their body, we suggest low fruit until it's conquered. How long will it take? One girl did it very strict, and she found that within a month she was free of her symptoms. Another lady took her 18 months, but then again she'd suffered for 30 years. So I don't know. We've got a saying in Australia, how long's a piece of string? It can be an inch long and it can be 10 metres long, 10 yards long. So you can see that if someone has a yeast presence, the best sign is the tongue. Tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. If you can scrape it off, that's waste. But little fungal buds at the back, that can give a yeast, indicate of a yeast presence. And so, again, an illustration of when you give the body the right conditions, it will heal. Looking at our alkaline foods, millet. You had millet for breakfast this morning, and millet is a grain. And you know what grains need? They need to be dressed. And so you could dress your millet with applesauce. Did you try the pear cream? Isn't it delicious? It's Brazil nuts and a tin of cooked pears just blended together. It's delicious, yeah. If your millet wasn't sweet enough, just pour more pear cream on it. Sometimes I pour half a cup onto it. Millet and sorghum. These two are the only lectin-free grains. Sorghum in Australia was only ever grown for cows, and then they discovered that it's gluten-free. And there are a lot of people today who are gluten intolerant. And so now they grow sorghum for humans. In Australia, there's a very famous cereal called Weet-Bix. And now they make Weet-Bix out of sorghum. It's a gluten-free Weet-Bix. One thing with millet, it needs 4 cups of water to 1 cup of millet. So it needs a lot of water with it. But it's really nice done overnight in the slow cooker. When my grandchildren come, Michael and I never have a cereal for breakfast, but the children love it. So whenever the grandchildren come, I cook millet. And they love it. So at home, if I've made applesauce, it can be that, or they'll have a little bit of honey and a bit of soy milk, chopped banana. They certainly love millet. It's a gluten-free grain, it's an alkaline grain, and it's a lectin-free grain. And I think on Friday morning you're having waffles, and the waffles are made out of millet. So that's another nice way to have millet. I told you we'd feed you well. Quinoa. Quinoa is a grain that was traditionally used a lot by the Aztecs, but it is fairly high in lectins. But if you rinse it 5 or 6 times before you cook it, you can rinse those lectins away. If you just cook millet, quinoa, it has a bitter taste. But if you rinse it very, very well, you'll find that you rinse the bitterness away. Buckwheat. Buckwheat is also a gluten-free grain, and it's also an alkaline grain. Spelt. So let me give you the wheat story regarding the protein. So the wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn. An Enkenhorn wheat has a very fragile protein or gluten structure. What that means is very easy to digest. Gluten is actually a lectin. It is not sure when, but it is estimated a couple of thousand years ago, Enkenhorn did a wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the Emma strain of wheat. Now this Emma strain of wheat that was a wild hybrid, it has a little bit more complex protein or gluten structure. And it was the Emma wheat that was put through intensive crossbreeding in the 1950s and 60s that produced the hybridized wheat that we have today. The hybridization of the wheat, the intensive crossbreeding it went through, created a very complex protein or gluten structure. Very difficult for most people to break that down. But if that wheat is made into a sourdough bread, that breaks down the protein or the gluten structure so it's less complex. Emma did another wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the spelt strain of wheat. And the spelt strain of wheat has a very similar protein or gluten structure to the Emma. And if that spelt flour is made into a sourdough, it brings the protein or the gluten structure back to the original fragile structure. If someone has celiac, they can't even handle the spelt because it certainly does have a little bit of gluten, but it is less complex. But if someone's gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant, they can usually handle the spelt sourdough. That explains why so many people are gluten intolerant today. One reason is they just overdo the wheat, cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, donuts, cakes, cookies, mid-morning, that's almost 100% wheat diet. And the wheat's been hybridized, and they were given bread too young as babies. Remember, the starch should never be given till the molars are fully through. So no wonder, if you want to talk about a true pandemic, it would have to be a gluten intolerance, wouldn't it? Plus, you've got so many people whose gut flora has been slaughtered by having antibiotics a couple of times every year. One lady emailed me and she said, I've got, the doctor said I've got fluid in my fallopian tubes in her, in her reproductive area. So he gave her antibiotics. And what would you give antibiotics for that for? And the biggest cause of urinary tract infections is antibiotics. They have a urinary tract infection, they have an antibiotic. It goes away. And then a week later or 3 weeks later, it comes back again. So what are they given again? Another antibiotic. It actually lays the foundation for it. In fact, you can ask Jacqueline about her history with that. It got to the point where she was losing her eyesight. She was on so many antibiotics. So you know what she did? She just took the bull by the horns and she worked it out herself. Drinking lots of water and manos, yeah, which is a concentration of the cranberry. Yeah. And that's what we have to do. We have to take control ourselves. And because the gut flora is so slaughtered with this drug medication, that's another contributing factor to the gut not being able to handle this complex protein structure that's in the wheat. Looking at our alkaline foods, there are 3 alkaline legumes. One is lentils, and as I mentioned yesterday, there's lots of different types of lentils. There's blue, brown, red, green, yellow, lots of different types. Soy, and as we looked at when we looked at hormones, soy is only a problem if it's been genetically modified, and lima beans. These are the 3 alkaline legumes. Nuts, the 2 nuts that are alkaline are the almond and the Brazil. Almond is called the king of all nuts because it is the highest in protein and it's the highest in iron. Brazil nuts, they're pretty impressive because they're phenomenally high in selenium. And our thyroid gland needs selenium to convert iodine into thyroxine. Only 5 Brazil nuts a day will give you all the selenium that you need for that day. All your seeds sit on the alkaline side. Let's look at the acid side. Refined sugar is number 1 in acid foods. The hybridized wheat is not far behind. This acid side is high in acid minerals. Your acid minerals are chlorine and phosphorus and sulfur. And the way that the wheat is grown, the way that the sugar is grown with superphosphates and glyphosates, that's adding to the acidity. Meat, when meat breaks down, it breaks down only 58% is burnt as fuel. That leaves a 42% sulfur waste. And that's why Dr. Colin Campbell, he could turn cancer on and off by the amount of meat and dairy products he was giving the rats, because it leaves a very acid effect in the body. Caffeine has an acid effect. Also, aged cheese. What's the blue in the blue vein cheese? It's mold. So there is a pH of 7 for some cheeses, and that would be fresh, like feta, ricotta, camembert. But then again, you have to look at the state of the cows they're coming from. Alcohol is not a food, but it certainly has an acid effect on the body. Tobacco is not a food, but it has an acid effect on the body. All drugs create an acid effect on the body. All your other grains, other than the grains on the alkaline side, all other legumes other than lentils, soy and lima bean, and all other nuts other than almond and Brazil have an acid effect. Now, to maintain this 6.5 environment, we should be taking in 20 to 30% acid-forming foods, and ideally those acid-forming foods come from this section here. And we should be taking in 70 to 80% alkaline-forming foods. When we maintain that ratio, we will be able to maintain the 6.5 environment at the cellular level. Especially when a diet that is high in vegetables and fruits and your alternate grains, and yes, sometimes we'll have rice, sometimes we might have oats, sometimes we might have macadamia nuts or legumes. Yeah, as long as it's not 100% acid. And when that is taken in combination with adhering to the laws of health, then that's the formula that keeps the body in good working order. And if it's not in good working order, that's the formula that will contribute to bringing about a healing condition in the body. Are you familiar with the hydrangea plant? The hydrangea plant's this big bush, and it has big flowers, and every flower is a combination of a whole lot of little flowers. And sometimes you'll see a hydrangea plant and all the flowers are pink. Sometimes they're all like a magenta, real dark pink. Sometimes the flowers are purple, sometimes the flowers are blue. It's not different types of hydrangea. The gardener plays with the pH of the soil, because different pHs in the soil produces different colour flowers. So just as the gardener plays with the pH of the soil, you can play with the pH of your soil, cell, to bring about different health or sickness environments in the body. And isn't it incredible what the human body endures when you consider what some people eat and how some people live? That certainly is the miracle of the human body. But the human body puts up a good fight, but eventually it does succumb. And that's why so many people, they're in their 50s, 60s, and they've found they've got cancer. And you know what they say? Why would God do this to me? God didn't do that to them. They actually did it to themselves. But remember that great deceiver. He's deceived the whole world. Because the first cigarette smoke doesn't give you lung cancer. The first cup of coffee drunk doesn't give you a disruption in brain chemistry and leach all your calcium out of your bones. It's little by little, by little, by little, by little. But the good news is, even though it happens little by little by little, if we stop and little by little by little start to implement these basic principles, the body can begin to heal and recover. That's the good news. We're going to have a 15-minute break now, or actually I think it's 13-minute break. And we'll come back at 10:30 and we're going to look at fantastic fats. Don't get terrified. Chemistry does terrify me a little bit, but it's important to look at the basic structure of fats, because when you understand the basic structure of the fat, then you understand how the body uses it, where the body uses it, and why the body uses it. Because there are so many different messages on fat, isn't there? Fat's bad. One lady just said to me she had a gallbladder out and the doctor told her to go on a low-fat diet because her stools were floating. Do you know it's really good when your stools float? It means that they've got a nice amount of bacteria in them. Yes, it's important as being your own doctor is every now and then you just have a little look. But you know, a better guide as to what to do is your body. Your body will tell you how much fat to eat. If you've had your gallbladder out and you eat fat and you feel nauseous, does that mean you can't eat fat? No, it just means to reduce it a bit. Reduce it a bit. And see what works. Maybe olive oil works better. Maybe coconut oil works better. Your body is your best guide. Your body can tell you what no test can tell. Your body can tell you what no specialist can tell. Your body will guide you. It'll say, I like that, and it'll say, I don't like that. So it doesn't mean that you can't eat it at all. It means you just keep adjusting until the body says, yeah, that's a good one. When we were in Chicago, a lady picked us up one day for the meetings we were going to, and she told me a very interesting story. She said that she used to have gut problems all the time. And she said it seemed like everything she ate caused gut problems. So she brought it right back to very simple, almost like just steamed vegetables. And her body said yes. And then about every week, she'd add a little bit more. She'd add a little bit more. She'd try some walnuts. She'd try this. And through doing a food diary, and that food diary, she'd look back over the weeks and she could start to see, every time I get that pain, it's when I eat that. Now, no test can tell her that. No doctor can tell her that. And she said now she knows what she can eat and what she cannot eat, and she eats quite a varied diet. I loved that story. Who did it? She did it. See, often as humans we get absolute. You get a pain with lentils, well, the lentils are out. No, just reduce them a little. Just try them with this, and maybe you'll find that it'll work better with vegetables than with rice. It's just playing with it. So that is why one of the laws of health is trusting God and trust the body He gave you, that it will let you know what works and what doesn't work. One gave me a great story about how if he had pain, instead of taking Tylenol, he'd take 2 glasses of water. That's right. Yeah, and he hasn't had Tylenol, and he still doesn't. He hasn't had Tylenol for 6 years, he said. I love that story. Can you see, it's working it out for yourself. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time. My husband, very black and white man, if he ever gets sick, he sits down and he considers his last 24 hours. That was good timing, Chelsea, when we're all laughing. We nearly lost Chelsea over the back of her chair then. And I stress this because it's an area that we have so much, we've been brainwashed from children to give your health to doctor. That doesn't mean you don't have maybe an assessment. If there's a problem there, you can't quite work it out, go and have it checked out. But I would definitely not have biopsies. I would definitely not have invasive tests. Definitely not so. Because sometimes those very tests can actually end up causing problems. And as I've said several times, that some writers are saying it'll probably take a whole nother generation to get fat phobia out of the brain. So let's have a look at fats. And the first one we're going to look at is flaxseed and chia. Flaxseed and chia are high in an essential fatty acid called omega-3. Whenever you see essential fatty acid, whenever you see the word essential, do you know what it means? Our body cannot make it, we've got to put it in. And what are we told is the highest source of omega-3? Fish? Is that right?
Yeah.
But no creature can put omega-3 into their fatty acid chain. Only plants can. So why are fish high? They eat a one-celled algae that's high. Well, we can do better than eating a one-celled algae. We can grind up flaxseed, and I think there was some ground up this morning. It's delicious, sprinkled on pear cream, applesauce, and the millet. Makes a delicious breakfast. And you know, the children, they love sprinkling, don't they? They love sprinkling things on. And chia seed can be mixed with water and made like a gel, and that can be poured over your fruit salad. So let me explain what this 3 means. So the flaxseed and chia seed are what's called 18-chain fatty acids, meaning that in the molecular structure there are 18 chains. And I've drawn this 18-chain fatty acid, and notice that there are hydrogen atoms either side, and in the middle they're all joined by a carbon atom. What the 3 means that at the 3rd carbon atom there's a double bond. So 1, 2, 3, there's the double bond. So instead of 1 link, there's 2 links. So whenever you get these 2 links, you get a change. These 2 hydrogen atoms go, and the hydrogen atoms underneath develop an electromagnetic field between them. And what that does is that causes a kink, because it creates this repelling action. And in flaxseed, chia, there are 3 double bonds in this 18-chain fatty acid. So 1, 2, 3, there's another one there. 1, 2, 3, there's another one there. So these hydrogen atoms are gone, and the hydrogen atoms underneath develop an electromagnetic field between them, again causing a repelling action. And what that does, that causes 3 kinks in the chain. And what that means is it's a very thin oil. It's a very fluid oil. Another name for flaxseed is linseed, and the British, they paint their cricket bats with linseed oil because it disperses so easy. And because it has this structure, it basically is like a blood thinner. It can even thin tumours. So this oil is called a polyunsaturated fatty acid. Poly meaning more than 1 double bond. Unsaturated because there are some empty spots on the fatty acid chain. So let's have a look at the effect of these double bonds in the body. The double bonds create an electromagnetic field, and that's what that repelling is. It's an electromagnetic field causing the repelling. So eating these foods high in omega-3 ensures that our nervous system and our brain is working well, because that's our electrical system. And Dr. Neil Nedley, in his book Depression: A Way Out, he spends a bit of time talking about the importance of omega-3 for brain function. These double bonds are light sensitive. So those empty spots attract the light. These double bonds are heat sensitive. They attract the heat. These double bonds act like a magnet to oxygen. As a result, if we grind this seed and eat it, ideally within an hour, we are getting a better electromagnetic field or spark from cell to cell. We're able to absorb light better. We're able to manage heat better. We're getting more oxygen. But if we grind that seed and leave it on the bench for a few hours, the light, heat and oxygen are attracted into here and the oil is spoiled. There is a use for your coffee grinder. It's grinding your flaxseed, ideally just before breakfast. And if you don't eat it all, put it in the freezer in an airtight container. So you've got about an hour once it is ground. There's a famous doctor in Australia called Dr. Sandra Cabot, and she wrote a book called The Liver Cleansing Diet, which is a world bestseller. And she made LSA famous. L meaning linseed, S sunflower, and A for almond. And it's grinding these two together and sprinkling them on your breakfast so that you can go into health food shops and buy LSA. And there it is in a plastic bag already ground. Don't touch it. Because within 1 hour of grinding it, the light, heat and oxygen been attracted. So you can grind it yourself at home just before you eat it. At our retreat in Australia, I think the staff grind it up twice a week, and it's the last thing to go on the table and it's the first thing to go into the freezer. So let me give you the omega-3 story, which I find quite fascinating. So the omega-3 that is found in flaxseed or linseed, chia, is called alpha-linolenic acid. And alpha-linolenic acid has 3 double bonds, as you see. So that's 1, 2, 3. ALA is converted in the body to EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and it has 5 double bonds. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the body, EPA is converted to DHA, decahexaonic acid, and that has 6 double bonds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's DHA that is used exclusively for cell membrane function and repair because it gives such a beautiful fluidity and yet strength to the membrane around every cell. The fish eats ALA in the algae. And in the fish, ALA is converted to EPA. And in the fish, EPA is converted to DHA. Man extracts that DHA, puts it into capsules and says, oh, this is superior. It's already available for you. But if 3 double bonds are sensitive to light, heat and oxygen, how sensitive is 6 double bonds? They would have to extract it with no exposure to light, heat or oxygen at all. Is that possible? And the fish that are the highest in the DHA are the highest in mercury and dioxin. Personally, I would prefer just to eat the flax or the chia or both over my fruit every morning. And I think God's got a sense of humour because the nut that is the highest in omega-3 looks like the brain. That's the walnut. And when I buy walnuts, I try and buy walnuts that have not been cracked, broken open like whole. A lot of people don't like walnuts because they're bitter. And they're bitter if they've been broken because the light, heat and oxygen are attracted to these empty spots. So walnuts shouldn't be bitter. If they're bitter, it means that they're usually broken open. And a lot of people buy the broken nuts because they're cheaper. I really buy nuts in their shell because you don't know if they're 10 years old, 20 years old or 6 months old. Do you? Now, if I go to a walnut farm and they've just been picked, I'll very happily buy them. But the problem in their shell, you don't know. You can't see what the nut's like inside. So I'm hesitant to buy them in their shell unless I can buy them straight from the farm fresh. But that explains why the walnuts are often bitter. It's because they're high in omega-3, so they're very sensitive to light, heat and oxygen. A lady gave me this story. She said that her little 10-year-old girl was an athlete, and she started to give her omega-3 capsules, fish capsules. She said within 6 months she wasn't doing very well at school, and she was getting periods of blackout. They had her tested. She had mercury poisoning from the fish oil capsules. Now they do test all fish oil capsules, testing for mercury, and a lot of them say mercury free, but I don't know, sometimes you can't put your trust in Princess, can you? And I think by law there's a small amount allowed to be in there. But personally I would rather go with the flaxseed and the chia. And some nutritionists are saying, no, go with the DHA capsules because it's already available for you, because the conversion of EPA to the conversion of ALA to EPA to DHA requires certain coenzymes which are found in, it's like your zincs, vitamin Bs, and what inhibits that is caffeine and alcohol. So some say, well, they're not going to stop their caffeine, they're not going to stop their alcohol, so just give them the DHA. But I find, in fact, I'm surprised how many people keep to the program, and I think it's because people understand why they should do this and why they shouldn't do that. Sunflower is high in omega-6. So what does the 6 mean? The 6 means that the 6th carbon atom, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is the first double bond. And there are 2 double bonds in sunflower. So 1, 2, 3, another one there. So you've got hydrogen atoms along here, and along here. So you've got 2 repelling actions, which means 2 kinks in the fatty acid chain. So this oil is called a polyunsaturated fatty acid because it's got more than 1 double bond. It's unsaturated because there are empty spots on the fatty acid chain. What about almond and olive oil? They are high in omega-9. 9 indicating the position on the fatty acid chain of the first double bond. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There it is there. So you've got hydrogen along here, along here, along here. You've got 1 repelling action, which means only 1 kink. So this oil is called a mono because there's only 1 double bond. A mono unsaturated because there's still an empty spot on the fatty acid chain. And I think we can all appreciate that olive oil is a thick oil, isn't it? It's because it's only got 1 double bond. But because it still has an empty spot, it is still unsaturated, it needs to be bought in a dark bottle or a tin, and it should be first cold pressed. Because if it's heat pressed, it destroys the double bond. Coconut. Now notice that these 3 here are all what's called long chain fatty acids, which is the 18 chain fatty acid, whereas coconut, it contains medium and short chain fatty acids. A medium chain fatty acid is 10, 12, 14, 16, whereas a short chain fatty acid is 6, 8, 10. And every spot is full. So in the cold weather, it's solid. And it's got no double bonds. And because it's got no double bonds, it's called a saturated fat. Saturated because every spot is full. Well, what is the best oil? Well, which body function are you talking about? Because the body needs them all. It uses them for different functions. But one of the unique things about the coconut oil is how quickly it's broken down. Do you remember where its breakdown happens? In the mouth. So I'd just like to recap that and show you so you can see how the body uses it. And so you can see that it's a total myth that saturated fat causes heart disease. So here's the stomach. We're doing a quick recap on digestion. Here's the liver, here's the gallbladder. And I'm so sorry to hear that some people have had their gallbladder taken out, especially when you realize it's unnecessary to take it out. And lining the small intestine are villi. So we'll magnify a villi, and up the middle of the villi is the lacteal. That's part of the lymphatic system, and then all through the villi is the blood capillary network. And as you will remember on Tuesday night when we went on our journey through the gut, I talked about the fact that our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube, and anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me till it gets broken down in the gut, absorbed into the blood, then it becomes part of you or me. So let me show you what happens with these 3 long-chain fatty acids. They're not broken down in the mouth. They're not broken down in the stomach. They come into the duodenum, and bile from the gallbladder emulsifies it to tiny particles. Pancreatic lipase further breaks it down, and then it is absorbed into the lacteal. Got that? Into the lymphatic system. It's taken to the liver and stored as fuel. It's almost as if the body says, the surgeons have arrived. Because the body uses these fluid oils for cell membrane function and repair. But the saturated fat is totally different because the breakdown begins in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase. So when it comes into the stomach, the breakdown's already happening. Comes into the duodenum, doesn't need bile, doesn't need pancreatic lipase, gets absorbed straight into the blood. Big difference, the blood. Then taken to the liver and burnt as fuel. What an amazing oil. So if someone had liver, gallbladder or pancreatic problems, what would be the best fat for them? The saturated fat. Because the breakdown begins in the mouth. And there's a doctor that should be getting Nobel Prize for his research in this field, Dr. Bruce Fife, F-I-F-E, and he's written quite a few books on the wonders of the coconut oil. So if someone wanted to lose weight, what would be the best fat? A fat that the body burnt or the fat that the body stored? Burned. It's very hard for us to say. We've been so brainwashed that the coconut is the best. So there's the story of the Australian farmer who got some coconuts cheap, wanted to fatten up his cows, so he broke the mountain and gave the cows the coconut. The cows lost fat, put on muscle and started bounding round the paddocks. So if you want to lose fat and put on muscle and bound around the paddock, what oil do you eat? The coconut. Yeah. Let's go to the planet. And right in the middle of the planet there is the equator. Which oils are grown on the equator? The coconut. And the saturated fat is perfectly designed for the equator. Because there are no empty spots, the coconut is light resistant, heat resistant, oxygen resistant. It is the most stable oil because there are no double bonds. So let's go up the planet. One more thing with the coconut oil. It has caprylic acid, which is antifungal. It has capric acid, which is antifungal, antimicrobial. It is 48% lauric acid, which is another antimicrobial. Lauric acid. The only other food that has lauric acid is butter, and it's 2%. So it's an amazing fat. Breast milk also has lauric acid. Let's go up the planet and we come to the Mediterranean. So what foods of these is grown in the Mediterranean? Almond and olive. So that's where you'll find the omega-9. Further up the planet, we'll find omega-6. Further up the planet, it's omega-3. Looking at that, we should eat food that's grown in our area because it's perfectly designed for our body's needs in that area. And Udo Erasmus, he wrote a book called Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill. And he quotes a study where they took a plant grown here and it was high in omega-9. Same species of plant grown further up, it was higher in omega-6. Same species of plant grown right up the top and it was higher in omega-3. He also tells the story of a man who went to live with the Eskimos and took his SAD diet. What's the SAD diet? Standard American diet. And the standard American diet is often totally deficient in all of these. In fact, animal products are a lot higher in omega-6, and when there's an overload of omega-6, it can cause inflammation. Anyway, this man was living with the Eskimos, eating his SAD diet, and within 2 months he was getting depressed, even suicidal. So they had to fly him out. If I went to live with the Eskimos, I think I'd just take a good store of flaxseed and chia. And you've probably heard of the SAD disease. The SAD disease is affecting the northern countries. It's seasonal affective disorder. And they're blaming lack of sun. There's never been sun. It's because they're eating the SAD diet. Because they're eating the SAD diet, they're not getting enough of these omega-3s and 6 in their correct balance. In his books, Dr. Bruce Fife, he talks extensively about the coconut oil. And he's got 2 books that talk about neurological problems and how the coconut oil can help. One book is Stop Autism Now. Another book is Stop Alzheimer's Now. Stop Autism Now is about all childhood neurodegeneration, and Stop Alzheimer's Now is about all adult neurodegeneration. So for the childhood one, that covers attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity, autism, epilepsy, whereas the adult one, that covers Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, dementia, Alzheimer's, Huntington's chorea. So it covers the adult neurodegeneration. And with both of them, he spends the first couple of chapters looking at why. Because remember Proverbs 26 verse 2, the curse causeless shall not come. So in the childhood one, the first 3 chapters is about vaccination. Because whenever he looked at the cases of autism, he was brought back every time to the childhood vaccinations. You see, it's the neurotoxins that are in the vaccines. And with the adult, he looks at, again, why there's damage. Sometimes it can be vaccine. Flu vaccines still contain mercury. Sometimes it can be just years of exposure to heavy metals. He also looked, as Dr. Hal Huggins does. Dr. Hal Huggins is a dentist. He wrote 3 books that I know of. It's All in Your Head, showing the link between problems in the mouth and disease. And the other one that Hal Huggins wrote is Uninformed Consent. A doctor can put mercury in your mouth, in your teeth, without telling you it's a neurotoxin. And he said to a friend of his, if I can link 1,000 cases of multiple sclerosis with mercury, I'll write a book on it. We have the book. It's called Solving the MS Mystery, Multiple Sclerosis. And that's what mercury does. So here's the nerve cell. And it, like every other cell in the body, is 50% fat and 50% protein. We looked at that. But with the nerve cell, you've got this fatty sheath that surrounds the arm or the axon coming out, and that's another 20% fat, which means nerve cells are 70% fat compared to the other cells. And that myelin sheath, it insulates the nerve cell, it conducts the messages through the nerve cell, it nourishes the nerve cell. Let's see, did I get it all? Nourish, insulates, protects, and conducts the messages through, the 4 things. So if someone's on a fat-free diet and on cholesterol-lowering medication and they've got a mouthful of mercury and they're eating fish every day, can you see that's a recipe for disaster? And what that mercury does, it starts eating away at that myelin sheath. When that myelin sheath is 2/3 gone, that's multiple sclerosis. So in his book, Stop Alzheimer's Now, that's what Dr. Bruce Fife does. He looks at all the different things that can contribute to the deterioration of nerve cells. So if someone says to me, my husband's got Parkinson's, how old is he? 65. Then I investigate. Because you can't just catch Parkinson's. Something has happened. Something has damaged those nerve cells. And it's possibly exposure to chemicals, it's possibly exposure to mold, it's possibly exposure to heavy metals. And it didn't happen overnight. Got that? It's often many years in the making. But what can you do? What can you do for it? Bruce Fife, in both of those books, in his 3rd chapter, I think it is, it's called The Ketone Miracle. And he gives a story that in the 1950s, in the John Huntley Hospital, doctors were experimenting on their epileptic patients to see if they could help them. And so they fasted them. Now, when you fast, what do you live on? Your fat cells, yeah? So when they were fasting, that fat went to the liver, and the liver broke it down to ketones. And what they found is that ketones are neuroprotective. In other words, they protect the nerve cell. And they also found that ketones were neurohealers. Not only did they protect, but they were able to heal the nerve cell. But you've got to eat. So what they did was they came up with the ketogenic diet. And the ketogenic diet is a high-fat diet. So this is a typical ketogenic breakfast. 4 eggs, 4 rations of bacon, and 1/4 pound of butter. But what they found, it was very difficult for them to eat such a high-fat diet. But by the way, no one was falling down from heart attacks or strokes. Because as I showed you the other day, it's not the fat. So what, and by the way, Dr. Atkins on his diet, which was basically, wasn't coined then, but it was basically a ketogenic diet. He found that his epileptic patients were reducing their medication. I don't know at the time of his death if he knew why. So what Dr. Bruce Fife came up with was he called it the modified Atkins or the coconut ketogenic diet. And the coconut ketogenic diet is having low carbohydrate. So once again, we come to this very low carbohydrate diet, high fiber, generous proteins and generous fats. But he talks about low carbohydrate, generous fiber, proteins, fats, and supplementing with coconut oil. For an adult, he says start with 1 teaspoon 3 times a day and build up to 4 teaspoons of coconut oil 3 times a day. And in the book Stop Alzheimer's Now, he has stories of people who've been able to turn Alzheimer's around by doing that. So how do you do it on a plant-based diet? So let me give you a typical ketogenic plant-based breakfast. And let's have a look at the breakfast we had this morning. So what we want to do is get the carbs down. So it'd be a bowl of lentils. It would be a whole avocado, a few tomatoes and cucumber maybe, and a pile of greens and some chia seed, flaxseed, and some nuts. That would be your ketogenic plant-based breakfast, and a teaspoon or two of coconut oil. So it's just getting the carbs right down, lots of fibre, protein every meal, and then supplementing with the coconut oil. And that's how you can do it on a plant-based diet. There's a movie called First Do No Harm. It was made in, I think, about the 90s. And Meryl Streep acts in it, so it's very well done, and it's a true story. And in the movie, Meryl Streep is the mother, and her son starts to have epileptic seizures. Now, in the movie, it doesn't tell you why, was he vaccinated, it doesn't tell you any of that. He just started to have seizures, so they put him on medication. And he started to want to jump off the roof of the house. So they put him back on other medication. Now he just turned into a zombie. And there's one scene where he's in the hospital, he's having a major seizure, and the doctor says to the nurse, quick, get some medication. The nurse comes running, and it's in a polystyrofoam cup, and they're about to inject it into him anally, because when they have a seizure, their jaws clamp. And as the nurse is running, the medication dissolved the polystyrofoam cup and it fell on the ground. And Meryl Streep's going, they're about to put that into her son. So at night, she picks up her son to try and get him out, but they catch her and she can't take her son. So she goes to the library and she discovers the ketogenic diet. And she discovers that in the John Huntley Hospital, they're doing the ketogenic diet. Now, the doctor was about to cut the top of the skull of this little 7-year-old boy to do further testing. And Meryl Streep said, I want to take my son to this hospital and try the ketogenic diet. Do you know what the doctor said? Oh, that's very dangerous. You know, we've lost the conception of what's dangerous. I wonder why they don't just try the ketogenic diet first. I'm having contact with a man and his child has seizures, yes, after the vaccine. And he talked to the doctor about going on the ketogenic diet. You know what the doctor said? Oh, we only use that for severe cases. Anyway, back to the movie, First Do No Harm. Eventually, the doctor agrees if she finds a doctor that will travel with them, and a friend of hers is a doctor, so they travel there. Do you know the first thing the doctor does is take the child straight off his medication? And then he's given his first meal, and I think it's 2 eggs and a rasher of bacon and some sliced tomato and spinach. So that's a little bit more reachable than the first one I told you. That was his ketogenic breakfast. Now, the nutritionist in the movie, she looks about 90. She is actually the nutritionist at John Huntley Hospital. And then when you see the, you know, at the end when they tell you the names of all the people, about 4 of the people who acted in the movie used to be epileptics and went on the ketogenic diet. So it's a interesting movie to see. I think it took a couple of weeks and the child no longer was having seizures. Just incredible how that, and what Bruce 5 shows is because the coconut is high in medium chain fatty acids. You've probably seen this written, medium chain fatty acids. Because the coconut is so high in medium chain fatty acids, the liver converts it very quickly to ketones. which is why they're finding the coconut oil is being so helpful in cases like this. So the coconut oil, rather than being public enemy number one and causing heart disease, which I trust I've proven to you is a myth, it's being used today to heal cases of neurodegeneration, whether it be in the area of Alzheimer's, dementia, multiple sclerosis, or whether it's being used for attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity, and autism or epilepsy in children. What he shows in the book Stop Autism Now is when you stop. Now, we've looked at this a few times, the common allergens, which is dairy and wheat, and I trust I've shown you the dangers of wheat. And oats are very high in lectins. But did you know that when the Scottish used to make their oats, they would soak them all day and put them on the corner of the wood stove all night, and that disarms the lectins. And my sons eat oats for breakfast every morning. It's not that oats are bad, they need to be properly prepared. And if someone has a health issue, whether it be a skin problem or irritable bowel, it is considered one of the common allergens because it is high in the lectins. Peanuts are commonly contaminated with mold, and then refined sugar, it just acts like kerosene to a fire in any problem. And what Bruce 5 shows, and I have seen it myself, is that if you have an autistic child and you take them off this food, 50% improvement. One lady said, but that's all my son will eat. I said, you'll be surprised what he will eat when he's hungry. And it doesn't hurt the whole family to change their diet. And in the book Stop Autism Now, Bruce 5 gives a few illustrations. The story I just told you, he relates that story in his book of people who've successfully conquered autism with these things. Some people say, how can we detox the child from the childhood vaccine? Well, the problem is the neurotoxins in the vaccines have already damaged the nerve cells. But the good news is that the coconut, which is high in the medium chain fatty acids, it is quickly converted by the liver to ketones. And as I showed you last night, glucose, it burns at 4 calories per gram, whereas fat, it burns at 9 calories per gram, and that's another reason why the brain loves using ketones as fuel, because the brain consumes 15 times the fuel of any other cell. And those ketones give more than twice the units of energy. So it not only is a high energy fuel for the brain, but it also can protect and even heal the brain cells. And when you think about it, when Captain Cook landed on the South Pacific Islands, he was confronted with the most magnificent specimens of humanity he had ever seen. The men were tall, strong, agile. Weston Price, he went in the 1930s assessing all their teeth. Perfect, 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 Joyce. The women were beautiful. And the white man came in and said, stop eating the coconut, it'll give you heart disease. Diabetes, cancer. And the white man brought in 5 lethal whites. White rice, white refined salt, white sugar, white wheat, and white cow's milk. What did I call them? 5 lethal whites. And those South Pacific Islands, their incidence of diabetes, their incidence of cancer, of heart disease is exactly the same as the white man's now. The fact is the white man could have learned how to eat off those native people. And in his book, Weston Price, who's a dentist, that's what he was looking at, is the dentistry and the jaw and the teeth. He went back, so first of all went there in the 1930s, you know, click, click, click. The book's just full of photos, beautiful teeth, even skulls of dead people, skeletons, perfect teeth alignment and jaw. And then he went back, I think it was in about the 80s or 90s, where white man, you know, had infiltrated, and the teeth are all clumped and cramped now, because the nutrition is so sadly lacking. So those island people are very big today, and it's not because of the coconut, it's because they've stopped the coconut. So in Fiji, when I'm there, I'm usually there every year, they have hot bread shops, and those hot bread shops are open till 11 o'clock every night. And when you walk past the hot bread shop, you can imagine the scent is amazing. Hot bread smells really good. So I often go to youth camps, and I'm shocked at the size of the young women. Men usually are fitter because, you know, they go to the gym and but the girls, yeah, they're not slender. In fact, there can be 30 young women at the camp between the age of maybe about 12 to maybe 30, and I would say that 80% of them are carrying too much weight. And it's because of the bread. And they serve the meal and there's always bread, and they say it's whole meal. I ate the cassava, the sweet potato. And if a young woman is overweight when she's 15, 16, by the time she's in her 20s, it's not usually any more slender. So I think it's sad, the brainwashing again that has been done. And as I showed last night in the area of diabetes, and also I showed you when we looked at the liver, fat doesn't make you fat. Fat is actually an essential nutrient. It's essential for the brain, and it's essential for the whole body. Keeps the skin soft. You don't have to spend a fortune on face creams, just eat some oil. And so ends my lecture on fantastic fats. Well, you're going to get a touch on the mind tonight, but tomorrow we're going to look at salt, water and exercise, and then on Saturday morning we've got a 2-part lecture on the mind. And here comes Christina.
I feel like the love boat on the activity.